A few days after Peter Parker's parents died, a baby named Teresa began being raised by adopted parents and was told she was the secret daughter of Richard and Mary, rescued from the wreckage of the plane. As this wasn't true, however, Teresa's true nature is a mystery. Potentially, she was raised in the chameleon school to become a villainous asset. After a few weeks, Ben and May adopted Peter. On that very day, Peter was almost run down by a car while playing in the street had May not pulled him to safety. May spanked young Peter, and now aware that they were not his parents, Peter told May that he hated her. May assured Peter that no matter what, she would always be there, assuaging his fears that everyone he cares about will eventually abandon him. It was a difficult transition for May, as she had to give up any dreams of getting a job using her art history degree, and she felt jealous of how Peter took Ben's affections away from her. Over time, however, she realized Peter made up for the fact that she was unable to provide Ben with any children of their own. Peter became aware that his parents were dead at a young age. One night, when Peter awoke crying in the middle of the night, May came to his side and vowed to always be there for him. Members of the First Line battled Nocturne again, this time in New York City's Baxter Building, where Nocturne had created an Akiem tech virus that threatened to consume the city. However, the team destroyed the virus and seemingly slew Nocturne, but not before the top 7 floors of the building were destroyed in the process. Meanwhile, as part of their invasion plans, a female Skrull was sent to seduce the Yeti. Meanwhile, a Skrull spy captured by Reed Richards while at university was turned over to the First Line's effigy for questioning, who learned of an impending invasion. During this time, the group included the mysterious Dr. Mime. At this point, the Yankee Clipper reappeared, having been launched forward in time from 1963. He was quickly reunited with his brother, Mr. Justice, and the rest of the team. However, finding himself a man at a time, Clipper decided to retire and accustom himself to the future time he found himself in. Pixie came to his aid to help him fit in. Reed and Ben graduated from State University, with Reed earning 2 doctorates and Ben getting advanced degrees in engineering. Reed proceeded to attend the University of Vienna, where he met Alyssa Moy, and they began dating. For his part, Ben joined the USAF and was deployed to Sin Kong, eventually becoming a captain. Victor Von Doom traveled to the Himalayas and spent months climbing the mountains and searching for clues to the whereabouts of a hidden tribe of monks. Victor utilized his technological skills to build devices that made traveling through the harsh winter climates of the mountains easier, but the trek was still one fraught with difficulty and danger. In one account, it is stated that Victor came upon the cave dwelling of the mystic known only as the Aged Genghis and attempted to force the elderly man his arcane secrets. The Aged Genghis refused, however, and convinced Von Doom to seek out a secret order of monks by giving him directions to their most hidden society. This refutes Doom's encounter with Otto, although the Aged Genghis' mental facilities are questionable at best. Doom himself has stated that he was able to divine the location of the monk temple from an ancient parchment that was over 600 years old. Doom's evenings were still haunted by nightmares of his mother and the demon who took her. Eventually, Doom's resources were nearly exhausted and he faced starvation and hypothermia. However, he found a minor repast from eventual death from the elements the day he was attacked by a Yeti, which Victor slew. The creature's flesh gave him food and his fur an extra coat to protect him from the elements. Eventually, his supplies ran out again, and after months of travel and on the brink of death, he found the temple collapsing outside. Victor was found by the monks and was nursed back to health. Doom found that the monks were masters of both magic and technology, and upon reaching full health, he began learning all they knew. Over the years, Carol Danvers' father became increasingly apprehensive of potential retaliation from the Kree for Marielle's desertion, causing him to drink and become abusive to his family. Meanwhile, in part due to her Kree heritage, the young Carol dreamed of becoming an astronaut and traveling to distant planets. Her father, however, could not accept women as men's equals, and, by claiming to face financial troubles, supported her brother Steve's career despite Carol's superior grades. Dismissing her need for a college education, he suggested she find a good husband instead. Carol turned 18 and turned her back on her father. joining the USAF to be a pilot and get a college degree via the military. Steve was tragically killed in military action in Senkong, which drew Carol back to her family, but she still never felt truly accepted by her father. When Jean Grey was 10 years old, she was playing with her best friend Annie Richardson, who was accidentally hit by a car. The stress awakened Jean's mutant telepathic powers, which emphatically linked her to her dying friend. The traumatic experience of Annie's death left Jean in a withdrawn and deeply depressed state. Moreover, not being able to control her newly awakened telepathic abilities forced her to isolate herself from other people to hold on to her sanity. Teenager Bruce Banner began talking to the Grey Hulk, a manifestation of his DID, as if he were an imaginary friend. Hulk was his way of creating the father figure he hadn't had, a coping mechanism still needed 10 years after the murder of her mother. Bruce watched as his classmate Carla was being harassed by Ken, the local bully. Bruce decided to get involved, but Ken hit him across the face with a metal lunch tray, and he and his friends began beating him up. Bruce was hospitalized with 3 broken ribs, a broken nose, 2 black eyes, and a tooth knocked out. His Aunt Susan was worried sick, but the school principal refused to do anything because it was Bruce's word against the other students. He pulled out Bruce's notebook containing strange equations that troubled him. Later, Bruce returned to school after recovering from his injuries and tried talking to Carla, but she didn't want to talk to him, because now everyone was teasing her, thinking that she was Bruce's girlfriend when she had no interest in Banner whatsoever, and she thought he was a freak. The Hulk told Bruce not to worry, because they would smash them all. Bruce refused, but the Hulk pointed out that he knew about Bruce's experiments with explosives in an abandoned cabin in the woods. Bruce told the Hulk to leave it alone and walked away. The Hulk screamed at puny Banner, telling him that he was the strongest there was. Later, Hulk took control of Bruce's sleeping body, went to the abandoned cabin, and planned an explosive in his high school. Horrified, Bruce got dressed and ran out of the house, hoping that he wasn't too late. He rushed into his high school, going into the boiler room where the Hulk had planted the bomb. The whole way, the Hulk mocked Bruce, pointing out that if he hadn't helped the Hulk, how did he know where the bomb was hidden? With 28 seconds to spare, Bruce pushed past the Hulk and disarmed it in the nick of time. However, his run through the hall had attracted the attention of his tormentors. They accused Bruce of trying to kill them all. He insisted that he had saved them, and that it had been the Hulk who had been responsible, but they began beating him up. Upstairs, Principal Guinness witnessed the entire situation and left Banner to get beaten up by his bullies. Afterwards, the Banners were told they wouldn't face any jail time if they left town once Bruce recovered from his beating in the hospital. Susan was visited by Major Thaddeus Ross, explaining that his people had examined the explosive that Bruce constructed. Although it was revolutionary in its design, a minor flaw in calculations made it harmless. He made Susan Banner an offer to guide Bruce through his education, as they saw a lot of potential in the boy. At age 15, Frank Castle had no friends or interest in girls, spending more time fighting in the halls than sitting in class. Peter became a reclusive but very bright child and found a love for reading and a love of science. Not long after this, Peter's Aunt May explained to Peter what fear was and its benefits to living creatures. Peter grew up fairly happy early on in his life, with trips to the beach with his aunt and kite-flying lessons with his uncle. Peter particularly bonded with Ben, taking on his knack for bad jokes and silly pranks. 1 year after being adopted, Peter was sent out to get some ice cream and was taunted by his peers. On the way home, there was a blackout, and while Peter was scared, he was found by his Uncle Ben, who escorted him home, using a pocket flashlight to guide the way. Ben would help everyone in the neighborhood, loaning money and never asking for it back, running errands for folks, and patching up houses and cars. Sometimes he would wonder if he could give Peter and May a better life if he focused more, worked harder, and fought for promotions. That stuff wasn't really him, but he wondered if all the helping was a way of running away from his responsibilities. Ben loved action movies, but when Peter asked him if he had been in lots of cool fights in his youth, Ben clarified that outside of movies, being a hero wasn't about punching somebody or blowing up the bad guy, but putting other people first. even when you know you're going to fail. However, following an incident where kids bullied Peter for wearing glasses, Ben began teaching Peter basic boxing. Ben also taught Peter how to ride a bike. After 2 years training with her sensei in Japan, Elektra was able to defeat him. Bowing to her, he revealed to her the existence of the chaste ninja clan. 3 weeks later, Elektra climbed a mountain to find the chaste, overcome by the snowstorm. Stick brought her inside. Elektra trained hard with the members of the chaste: Stick, Stone, Claw, Flame, Shaft, Star, and Wing. She wanted to be called Psy, but Stick simply called her Snot throughout her training. The training was harsh, with Stick knocking her down in the snow and making her want to prove herself. He taught her how to headbutt. While training in the harsh winter, Elektra briefly mentally communed with Stick, sensing his old pain of leaving behind his family to join the chaste. Relieving her old pain as well, she tried connecting with Stick, but he just focused back on her training. Stick forced Elektra to train in a dark cave, one that Stone had warned her meant death. Elektra yelled that Stick was trying to punish her because she'd learned about his wife and daughter, but he made her go in anyway. Eventually, she was kicked out of the chaste, as they found her soul too dark. Elektra was picked up by Akem of the Hand, who pretended to care for her as a ploy that convinced Elektra to give her her loyalty. At his boarding school, Tony learned discipline of body and strength of character as Howard intended, while spending his free time reading alone. He was bullied by his peers and sneered at by his teachers, who thought him to be too childish. Tony found an escape from this by continuing to enjoy stories about King Arthur at the age of 13, as well as taking interest in Marco Polo, Vasco da Gama, and the Wright brothers. Stark's time in private school wasn't entirely miserable, however. Soon he made friends with another boy named Tiberius Stone. The two developed a friendly competition with each other in both academics and athletics. As Tony continued his high school career, he was known as the resident genius. While this earned him the favor of a girl named Jules, it also earned him the ire of another named Miles, who was always Tony's second. One of Tony's earliest relationships at the time was with Meredith McCall, daughter of Creighton McCall, one of Howard Stark's chief competitors. Neither parent approved of their relationship, and they were forbidden from seeing each other. In order to ensure this, Creighton McCall had his daughter shipped off to a private school in Europe. On his second tour of duty, 21 years old, Marc Spector's Marine superiors caught notice of the bizarre behavior caused by his DID. After his past at a psychiatric hospital was dug up, Marc was dishonorably discharged. For the next 4 years, Marc worked as a mercenary. He escorted a man named Wenzel through a South American jungle to try to find Professor Glasgow and terminate his primal project that turned men into werewolves. They completed the mission, killing the professor. During another mission, Marc worked with Joshua Mendossi, helping a South American rebel coup. When army loyalists cornered them, Joshua saved Marc's life. One autumn, he took a job from Mr. Collins in Stuttgart, Germany, to retrieve a box containing the head of Medusa. Marc infiltrated the building of Mr. Karg, as well as Collins's daughter, who wanted to save her father from his own greed. Marc used a mirror to turn Medusa's stare to Karg, turning him into stone, and was able to complete the job. On another occasion, Marc heard from a drunken archaeologist the location of an extremely valuable idol in Jivaro territory, and so he retrieved it. After grabbing it, Marc fled from a starving dog and fell on a hole in the ground, landing on a buried underground Incan temple. Marc had to decide between leaving the idol behind or leaving the temple to be found by archaeologists. Choosing the idol, Marc made his way to society, but had to survive bats, rats, falling off a mountain, a rope bridge collapsing, crocodiles, jaguars, snakes, native headhunters, and quicksand, only to find out it was a plaster idol commonly sold to tourists of the Incan temple for $3. Marc and a scout team later took out a terrorist camp in Mozambique, indiscriminately killing terrorists, women, and children. Johnny and Sue Storm's father, Dr. Franklin, was one of the greatest surgeons in the United States, but he kept fighting with his wife Mary, and they ignored Sue. This led to Sue feeling like she was invisible, and she became highly protective of her heart. When Johnny was 9, Dr. Storm was driving himself and Mary to a dinner being held in his honor. However, one of the tires on his car suffered a blowout. As a result, the car swerved off the road and crashed, fatally injuring Mary. Unscathed himself, Dr. Storm operated on Mary in a desperate attempt to save her life, but to no avail. Franklin Storm blamed himself for her death. He gave up his medical career and turned to excessive gambling, eventually having to borrow money from an underworld loan shark. When Dr. Storm proved unable to repay the loan in time, a criminal in the employ of the loan shark confronted Dr. Storm and threatened to kill him and his children. Storm grappled with the criminal, and during the fight, the criminal shot himself. Storm was charged with manslaughter and, still tormented by guilt over Mary's death, refused to say anything in his defense during this trial. Hence, Storm was sentenced to 20 years to life imprisonment. Wishing to spare his children further distress, Dr. Storm asked his daughter not to visit him in prison and to tell Johnny he was dead. Reed began attending Columbia. During the summer months, Reed rented a room from Mary Gay Dinkins. There, he met Susan Storm, Mary's young niece, who was much younger than he was. The girl developed an instant crush on Reed. Shortly after, he joined the military to fight in Sin Kong for 6 years. Xavier's travels brought him to Tibet, where he discovered a mysterious walled-off city. Upon further investigation, he discovered that the city was enthralled by the alien invader known as Lucifer and led a rebellion against the would-be world conqueror. Although Xavier foiled Lucifer's plans, a falling block fell on top of him, paralyzing Xavier from the waist down. Xavier called out mentally for help and was rescued by Teresia Karisic, a mutant who carried Xavier to medical aid. Taken to a hospital in India, Charles was told by doctors that he would never walk again. He was then nursed back to health and put through physiotherapy with a young American nurse named Amelia Vaught. Amelia pushed Xavier to the limits to rehabilitate himself and find a new will to live. 3 months later, the couple moved into an apartment together in Bombay. There, Xavier began working on schematics for a mutant detecting computer he called Cerebro. Vaught, a mutant herself, became upset when she learned of this, until Xavier revealed that he too was a mutant. Although Amelia remained with Xavier, she was uneasy with the notion of gathering mutants and training them to battle for peaceful coexistence between humans and mutants, content enough to live out her life as a mutant in anonymity. Nonetheless, Amelia returned with Xavier to the United States to start up Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. Back in the United States, Xavier was contacted by John and Elaine Gray, whose daughter Jean had developed telepathic and telekinetic powers. The 11-year-old Jean was traumatized, and Charles was able to use his powers to pull her out of her shell. Afterwards, Xavier attempted to help her control her telepathic abilities. Charles attended classes at Columbia University in New York and earned his Ph.D. in anthropology, then spent the next several years earning his M.D. in psychiatry at a university in London, England. Charles renewed contact with Moira, and they designed Project Mutant. Charles worked with her and Dr. Carl Lykos, a professor who, during a trip to Tierra del Fuego, had suffered a pteranodon bite that changed him and caused him to need to drain life energy from other living beings to survive. Xavier knew about Lykos' need and ability to siphon the life energy of others into himself, but he kept the secret. Scott Summers had been in Mr. Sinister's orphanage for 2 years. To further groom Scott to his liking, Sinister had another orphan named Toby Bully Scott, as well as himself in his child persona of Nate. While Scott was in the infirmary after a fight with Toby, Administrator Robin Hanover decided to take personal interest in him and began trying to learn more about Scott and his background. Learning this, Sinister, in his guise of Mr. Anderson, the head of the orphanage, warned Hanover to not get too personally involved in the lives of the children. He then decided Toby's usefulness had come to an end and forced him to commit suicide by jumping off the roof. Scott tried to stop him and failed, and his horror at being unable to save Toby left him more open to Mrs. Hanover's attempts to get through to the boy, much to Sinister's chagrin. Bruce Banner studied nuclear physics in Navajo, New Mexico at Desert State University as the star student of Professor Herbert Josiah Weller. At age 20, he dated a girl named Susan Jacobson, but their relationship soon became rocky when Bruce lacked any sort of intimacy, and she broke it off after one night where he tried to force himself upon her. Between now and the next 4 years, Bruce obtained his doctorate in nuclear physics at Caltech alongside Philip Stearns. Bruce then attended Pennsylvania State University for 1 semester. Already wanting to study gamma radiation, he employed fellow student Walter Lankowski as an assistant. Despite Walter being there on a football scholarship, he had a genius mind and was keen to learn about gamma, causing outbursts from Bruce, angry that a jock wanted to take away the one thing that was his. Bruce also worked with Peter Corbeau and Raoul Stoddard. It was during his time at Penn State that Banner found inspiration from Einstein and, like the famous scientist, bought a whole wardrobe consisting entirely of purple suits. After Bruce moved on, Walter played a few years for the Green Bay Packers, becoming very wealthy. Later, Bruce attended Dr. Derenic Zadian's Forward Thought Conference at Oxford University, where he met Tony Stark. This would lead to a lifelong scientific rivalry between the two. Although the pair quickly clicked, their different backgrounds eventually caused them to drift apart. 3 years after the formation of the Pride member Janet Stein accidentally became pregnant. After some discussion, the decision was made that each couple within the Pride would conceive 1 child, and those 6 children would inherit the Gibberim's reward and place in paradise. This agreement also ended the open struggle between the members of the Pride. Working together, the Pride ruled over their criminal empire with vision and efficiency for close to a quarter of a century, with few real challenges to their power. In his penultimate year of high school, Frank Castle made his first friend, Stedman Sternberger, after protecting him from a gang of bullies and continuously protected him afterward. In return, Stedman convinced Frank to channel his antisocial behavior into Pee-wee hockey. During a hockey match, Frank met Maria Falconio. He was smitten with her, but too afraid to talk with her, so Stedman fixed them up. Maria's influence suppressed Frank's bad behavior. Frank joined a seminary and studied for priesthood, although his tutor felt he was too quick to judge and lacked compassion. Ultimately, he had to drop out because he couldn't reconcile the fact that God allowed so much suffering in the world. Carol Danvers was tasked with inaugurating an experimental jet built by the precocious 15 years old Tony Stark. The recon flight was interrupted as she was put down by a terrorist leader named Ghazi Rashid, who captured and tortured her for several days in Afghanistan. Even with a broken leg and serious injuries, Carol managed to escape, execute Rashid, and discover he had been in contact with a traitorous CIA agent. Carol made it to a safe house, where she debriefed Colonel Michael Rossi. Not trusting the CIA, she chose not to share the intel she had collected. Her alleged amnesia cost her her position, and she was no longer cleared for flying. Danvers was trusted by Rossi to be recruited into Air Force Special Operations Command, and he eventually became her first love. Peter was taken by his uncle to see the New York Mets play. Peter quickly found a love for baseball and got into the game. When the Mets lost the game, Uncle Ben told Peter that losing was part of life. The pair made it an annual tradition to go out and see a Mets game, and each year they went out. The Mets lost. Peter Quill was raised by his mother Meredith, who remained a single mother but had help from her best friend Lisa Chang and her daughter Monica. Peter soon started developing a big interest in sci-fi shows. After a visit to an amusement park, he was impressed by the wonders of space and decided he wanted to be an astronaut when he grew up. At age 10, Peter returned home, bruised from trying to stop a bully. As he was washing up for dinner, his house was visited by 2 Badoon aliens. Vowing to end the Spartax bloodline, they killed Meredith. Peter grabbed a shotgun and managed to kill the aliens with it. He then found his dad's element gun in a closet. Peter fled the house just before the Badoon ship destroyed it. He woke up in the hospital 2 days later, where the nurses informed him the incident was ruled as a gas leak. After that, he had his element gun returned to him. Peter was placed in an orphanage, where he had much trouble adapting and finding a foster home. However, he never lost his desire to become an astronaut, leave Earth, and find the aliens that killed his mother. Warren Worthington III was placed in the Fairburn Boys' School, where he continued to excel in his classes. He discovered women were naturally attracted to him. He became friends with Candace Southern, who secretly had a crush on Warren. Warren's first girlfriend was Cressida Desford. She was ordinary, rich, but ordinary, and obsessed with people who weren't. Other girls had their rock idols and sports heroes, while Cressida had superheroes and daydreams of mutant lovers. Warren could not compete with her obsession with superheroes, so they soon drifted apart. At 15, Tony Stark enrolled at MIT. After he quit Team X, Wolverine joined Department K, a secret Canadian Defense Ministry branch. Based in Ottawa, he partnered with Neil Langram. Langram was sought as an operative by the Hellfire Club, but he refused and was then slain by Sabretooth, who had been hired as a mercenary. Wolverine partnered up with Carol Danvers, investigated and infiltrated a top-secret research and development agency which was in its early stage of growth. Hidden in a sub-basement of a vast governmental complex, Department H. Within, they discovered a list of several names called the Mutant Agenda, and, more troublingly, the names of both Logan and his dead partner Neil were on it. Logan and Carol tracked down the name on top of the list, Dr. Perry Edwards. He explained what mutants were, and that some weren't benevolent, and were planning to kill all the members of the inner circle of the Hellfire Club in their search for power. But to that end, they needed to keep the existence of mutant kind a secret. After infiltrating the Hellfire Club in order to learn more, Logan and Carol were lured by Sebastian Shaw and Sabretooth to a Canadian Hellfire Club facility where Sabretooth confronted them. After discovering that Sabretooth had killed several government officials, including Logan's partner, to make sure the existence of mutant kind couldn't be revealed to the public. Sabretooth told Logan details of the club's intent to guide a war between mutants and humans. Sabretooth tried to kill Logan, and during their fight, he told Logan that it was time for him to admit the truth. He was a mutant just like him, and that was why he was so obsessed with mutants. Logan stabbed Sabretooth with his sword. Despite the severe injury, Sabretooth wasn't done, and he decided to bomb the facility, but Logan and Carol were able to escape in time. After this adventure, Logan and Carol parted ways, but after he started to talk about his conspiracy with the Ministry of Defense, Logan's reputation was now dirt in his country. As a result, he tried to forget about the mutant problem and decided to go to the Yukon. But Logan was still troubled by Sabretooth's revelations, and he started to develop a morbid preoccupation with the current mutant scandals. To make things worse, Logan's natural mutation started to take its toll on his mind around that time, giving him nightmares and visions every night to the point of turning him crazy and feral. As a result, Logan started to abuse drugs and he became an alcoholic. This self-destructive behavior led Logan to accidentally shoot a fellow agent at a firing range one day, and as a result, he was dismissed from Department K and decided to leave Canada. Before leaving Canada, Logan was pumped full of Thorazine, beaten, and kidnapped by a group of armed men from the Weapon X project under Romulus orders. Dr. Truett Hudson, Dr. Abraham Cornelius, and Dr. Carol Hines began to examine Logan while he floated in a containment tank. Logan's skeleton, including his claws, was bonded with the indestructible metal known as adamantium, making it unbreakable and burying his personality beneath the most intense brainwashing he had ever undergone. Logan was put under deep hypnosis, telling him that he was not a man or individual, and being a man disgusted him. Reduced to a near-mindless state, Logan was forced by Weapon X to slaughter every inhabitant of the small town of Roanoke as a test. Logan proved too difficult for the Weapon X program to control, and after some time, he broke free of the programming, fell into a berserker fury, and escaped the facility, killing nearly everyone except for the professor, Dr. Cornelius, Dr. Hines, and Malcolm Colcord, who later became the director of a new Weapon X program. Unknown to Logan at the time, the Winter Soldier was present and helped him escape from his captors. Young mutant Gambit was also present, commissioned by Mr. Sinister to recover his diary from the facility. Gambit was discovered by guards, but got away with the diary in the confusion caused by Logan's escape. Appalled by the experiments he saw at the facility, Gambit burned the diary. Back in New Orleans, Sinister accepted Gambit's claim that the diary could not be found, but predicted that they would have a bright future together. As a result of having his bones and claws laced with the adamantium, Wolverine's natural mutation, which was an ongoing state, slowly turning him feral, was put into remission as the adamantium precipitated a chemical change within his body. As a result of this experiment impeding his natural evolution, Wolverine's healing factor was weakened, and he healed slower than before. Driven into savagery by the experiment, Logan wandered the forests of the Canadian Rockies for months, living in a feral state. During this period, the feral Logan saved the lives of a young couple and their children from a pack of wolves while he was hunting. Logan also saved the life of a creature known as the Hunter in Darkness, one of a race of feral beings apparently mystical in origin. A psychic link of some sort was established between the two, to resurface in later years. Wandering in the woods, Logan was eventually discovered by Heather and James Mac Hudson, a young couple honeymooning in the Rockies whom he attacked, only to be shot by James, who neither knew was Wolverine's cousin from his maternal Hudson line. While he recovered, Logan regained enough of his human persona to be horrified at his claws, believing them to be artificial implants. Recovering his mental faculties with the Hudson's help, Logan became a member of Canada's Department H, the superhuman-oriented government agency James Hudson founded. After graduation, Frank Castle's friend Stedman went out to party with his fellow classmates, but the driver of their car got drunk and crashed. Every occupant left the scene, leaving Stedman to bleed out for 4 hours until his death. 18-year-old Frank killed those involved to avenge his friend. The day the bodies were found, Frank joined the Marines, and Maria announced to him that she was pregnant. During basic training, Fred met an unidentified man employing a Captain America uniform for the military. Frank's immense respect for the uniform prevented him from striking the instructor during a training exercise, which resulted in a lecture from Cap and a beating from his fellow Marines, all of which Frank endured without so much as a whisper. 8 months later, Frank came home from boot camp and married Maria. 2 days later, Frank was shipped off to the United States Marine Corps School of Infantry. Soon after, Maria had her child, Lisa Barbara. At infantry school, Frank met Fan Bighawk, an American Indian scout. He was assigned to be Frank's guide, and through Fan, he learned how to survive in the wilderness. At one point, his friend from training, Roger Wong, was found to be running a black market supplying the locals with weapons. To keep him away from the trial, Frank was sent stateside for a month, running a recruitment office. There, he met Linus Lieberman when he disqualified him from the draft for having flat feet and being overweight. At 24, Marc Spector began dating Lisa Maloney and working with his brother Randall. During an assignment gun running in Italy, Rand intended to sell out his opposition. He killed Lisa to keep her from exposing the scheme, but before she died, she told Mark of Rand's betrayal. Mark hunted Rand down, chasing his brother for 2 days and 2 nights until he lobbed a grenade at him, which mangled and seemingly killed him. Scott Summers had been in Mr. Sinister's orphanage for 5 years. Learning that Scott had a love of airplanes, Administrator Robin introduced him to Colonel Richard Bogart and his wife, Tricia. However, Scott suffered PTSD at the Colonel's ship's flames due to its traumatic memories of the plane crash that had drastically changed his life. Despite this and attempts by Sinister to convince Scott to stay at the orphanage, the Bogarts became interested in adopting Scott. Seeking to stop this, Sinister had the Bogarts die in a plane crash and had Robert Hanover removed from the orphanage. That night, while Scott slept, he was psychically contacted by Charles Xavier and Jean Grey. They sought to recruit Scott into their school for months, but Xavier was not ready to make first contact and told Jean to leave. His order came too late, as Jean was drawn to Scott, and their psychic embrace assisted Scott through his nightmares, helping him make peace with his dreams as he no longer had to associate the sight of flames with his plane crash, but with Jean's Phoenix-like warmth. Through all of it, Scott believed the encounter was only a dream. Due to the fact that he did not need air or food to survive, Cain Marco, now the Juggernaut, eventually dug himself free from the ruins of the Temple of Chitarak with his newfound immense strength and invulnerability. At the time, Jean Grey was a freshman. He then confronted the previous man to hold the mantle of the Juggernaut, the local Jin Taiko. Marco killed Taiko in order to fully embrace the powers of the Juggernaut, and under the influence of Chitarak, slaughtered Taiko's entire village since they had ceased their worship to him. Peter's Uncle Ben told Peter that he should spend the day outside. Peter crossed paths with a boy his age, Eugene Thompson, who bullied those around him. Seeing how the other children feared and respected Eugene and his natural athletic ability, Peter envied him, unaware that he came from an abusive home, where his father beat him despite the 10-year-old Eugene seeking his adoration. Peter returned from his day outside with his uncle, and he told Peter that being as smart as he was almost a superpower, and that, with great power, there must also come a great responsibility. One day, Peter bought ice cream for himself using his allowance, and a bully named Butch chased him for it. Remembering advice from his uncle, Peter surprised the bully by fighting back and tackling him. As bullies are cowards, Peter was able to escape, making Ben proud. Not long after this, May and Ben took Peter to an open house of a science facility owned by Oscorp, where Peter was inspired to pursue a career in science by its owner, Norman Osborn. Norman had just gained unprecedented riches after his company Oscorp was about to go bankrupt. One fateful night, Mephisto approached Norman in the guise of an acquisitions investor and offered him a deal to make his financial life more successful in exchange for his son's soul and to take the life of someone with a soul dagger. Norman initially refused the deal, but after the devil explained to him that if he accepted, he would not even remember their encounter, he agreed. With the deal closed, Mephisto made Norman's business life immensely successful both financially and in status, but made him relentless in the process, ultimately leading to his madness. This reality-warping deal greatly affected Norman's life, not only as his soul was corrupted and he became so obsessed with wealth and power, but it also affected his son Harry, who would suffer great misfortunes. But Mephisto honored his part of the deal, as Norman's business partner, Mandel Strom, was eventually arrested after he discovered he was committing embezzlement, granting Norman complete control over the company, as he always wanted. While going through Strom's notes, he found a secret formula that would make him superhumanly powerful, but they proved hard to decipher. Norman began developing the notes into a serum in what he called Biogenetic Project Supreme. His research assistant, Nels Van Adder, accepted to be used as a guinea pig to test the formula before they had a stabilizing reagent. As a result, Nels horribly mutated into a red creature. Following his transmutation, he blamed his boss for his predicament, but was soon reminded by Norman that Nels had volunteered for that. A short time after letting Norman collect a sample of blood, Nels ended up losing control and attacked his employer. Police Captain George Stacy and his brother, Oscorp Head of Security Arthur Stacy, arrived just in time to save Norman's life, throwing Nels out of a window into a nearby river. Nels survived and moved into an abandoned apartment complex where he lived in squalor with dummies modeled after his wife Olivia and their children, Lucas and Hope, as he felt he could not face the real ones looking the way he did. After being frightened by a spider, Peter's uncle taught the boy not to fear the arachnids, as they were relatively harmless. During another trip out to watch the Mets play, Peter was knocked unconscious while trying to catch a home run and was struck in the head by the ball. The Mets mascot attempted first aid on Peter, frightening him when he came to. Jack Murdock made their sons, Matt and Mike, promise to study so they could become someone important like a lawyer and not a loser like himself. Matt took up studying, causing his peers to mock him, calling him Daredevil, because it must take him a lot of nerve to open those big scary books. They got the nickname from the time his dad tried wrestling as Jack the Devil. Mike defended his brother and beat up the bullies, earning a scolding from Jack. When Jack was roughing up one of the Fixer's clients, his daughter walked in, and Jack saw his sons reflected in her. He quit working as an enforcer, so Fixer allowed him to box again. Later, Jack saw the man he was roughing up had been murdered, leaving his daughter an orphan. He walked home shaken. Matt tried to fight back his bullies for once. He came back to his shaken dad, who beat him for disobeying his orders against fighting. Matt decided he'd become a lawyer so that there'd be justice in the world. By summer, Mike was all too happy to bet against his dad during his boxing matches. Mike got bad grades and should have been doing summer school, but he paid Matt to cover for him. Matt had turned 15 and one day found himself running from a group of bullies led by Nate Hackett when he noticed a blind man trying to cross the street, even as a truck from the Ajax Chemical Company was rushing towards him, about to run him over. Matt pushed the old man out of the way, and the truck's radioactive chemicals spilled on him, blinding him. Matt was taken to the hospital as Mike and Jack grieved. Izzo spied on Matt's hospital room and, confirming the radiation had given him augmented senses, to stick anonymously that he should train the boy. Matt was visited by his mother in the hospital, who convinced him to keep his powers a secret, as they were a gift from God. Unknown to them, Mike was in the waiting room outside and witnessed the exchange. Finding out his mother was still alive, Maggie then visited Jack, who was weeping with guilt in a church. To comfort him, she gave him her cross necklace, hoping it would remind Jack that he was a good man, and that was why Maggie had left the babies with him. The Ajax Company told Jack not to sue them, or else they'd expose his connections to the Fixer. Matt spent the next months struggling to cope with his augmented senses, which overwhelmed him. He was approached by Stick, who began training him and teaching him martial arts. Following his training, Frank Castle served the Marines for 4 tours, of 1 year each. During them, he was chosen by Olivier, a fallen angel who wanted to conquer hell, but needed an army. Every person Frank killed from that moment traveled to a portion of hell where Olivier's army could amass. After rising to sergeant, Frank Castle was asked to hunt down a sniper known as the Monkey, who wore a monkey skull around his neck as a medallion. Frank ended up being captured, but he escaped, killed the monkey, and usurped his symbol, painting a skull on his own chest. The skull painting's design was inspired by the shape of Olivier's face, the demon influencing Frank. Despite being one of, if not the best sniper in the Corps, his superiors didn't like him and put him in situations where they hoped he would be killed. Frank eventually rose to the rank of captain. Tony began experimenting with alcohol and began dating a girl named Naomi Clark. One night, when Tony was 17, he and Naomi drank wine coolers and Tony took Naomi racing on his motorcycle. Tony crashed the bike, but only walked away with nothing more serious than a broken arm. Within 5 years, Doom had surpassed the Tibetan monks' abilities. So impressed were the monks that they named him their leader. He constructed a device that allowed him to monitor all television, radio, satellite, and internet transmissions, learned that his old-school rival Reed Richards was working on a new experimental space vessel, and grew furious. Victor insisted that the monks all begin referring to him as Dr. Doom, finally growing fed up of the constant nightmares and wishing to feel neither emotion nor pain. Victor began to design a suit of armor that not only protected him from the dreams, but also severed his physical connection to the world, making him a cold engine of logic. Doom had the monks forge this armor for him, and when they were constructing the mask, Victor put it on before it could cool, ignoring the searing pain, which disfigured his face even more horrifyingly than before. Deciding it was finally time to get revenge against King Vladimir, the newly born Dr. Doom left the Himalayas for his homeland with Larin, one of the monks from the monastery, to accompany him. When Dr. Doom first arrived in Latveria, he and Larin took refuge in a small abandoned castle which overlooked the abandoned village where, many years ago, his mother had been responsible for the death of every child that lived there. Doom made his presence known by confronting guards watching over a chain gang of slave workers. Doom slew the soldiers and freed the slaves, telling them to spread the word that the tyrants of Latveria would fall to the might of Dr. Doom. Victor tracked down the Zephyro tribe and reunited with his old caretaker Boris, telling him to gather the elders to spread the word of the coming takeover of Latveria, ordering them to have their people pass out holographic projectors showing Dr. Doom's opening salvo against Vladimir's forces. A lone dissenter was slain, and the rest fell in line. However, they all feared that Victor had become just what they feared he would one day be. Soon, word spread of Dr. Doom's plans and of a rebellion army. Valeria came to see Victor and was horrified to see what he had become. When she spoke against him, Doom had her removed from his audience. Soon, Doom sent out his rebellion forces with his army of robots and gained many victories. More and more people joined Victor's rebellion, including many of Vladimir's soldiers. Dr. Doom eventually sent a messenger with a holographic projector so that Victor could issue his ultimatum to King Vladimir: surrender and live, or fight and die. Vladimir refused to surrender, so Doom ordered his people to prepare for the final battle. Victor and his army pushed through the last lines of defense before King Vladimir's castle. With his enemies about to attack, Vladimir ordered his second-in-command to have his sons, Rudolfo and Zorba, taken to safety. When Doom's army arrived in the capital city, the soldiers departed, not wishing to fight an unbeatable foe. Doom entered the town alone and learned that King Vladimir was attempting to escape the city through a secret tunnel in the local cathedral. There, Doom confronted his most hated enemy, the man responsible for the murders of his mother and father, and strangled him to death. With Vladimir dead, Victor took his royal cloak as his own. Upon the death of Vladimir, Dr. Doom had his castle destroyed and relocated the new capital city of Latveria to the town where his mother died years ago, rebuilding the castle there as his new imperial center. The town was renamed Doomstad, and Victor was crowned king of the land. Prince Rodolfo was captured trying to flee Latveria, forced to abdicate his position as Latverian royalty, and sentenced into exile. Now with a kingdom to command, Doom used his mystical skills to summon up Mephisto, and the two entered into a pact. Doom would be offered a chance to try and save his mother's soul once a year. However, if Victor should fail, the price was that the people of his domain would slowly grow to hate and despise him. Victor agreed to these terms. For the moment, Doom kept his rule of Latveria a secret from the outside world. Following his conquest of Latveria, Doom kidnapped French scientist Professor Lafarge and his daughter Cosette. Doom kept Cosette hostage, forcing Lafarge to build missiles that became the first line of defense against any attack against Latveria by a foreign government. Meanwhile, Colonel Thaddeus Ross and his squad were sent on a mission to the Pyrenees Mountains in Catalonia to recover an ancient artifact that could be used as a powerful weapon. Corsical Volatzin, their paranormal expert, used a mystical device to draw them to the object, the Orkovsk Eye, embedded in the chest of a centuries-old knight. Volatzin told the squad to remove the object and put it in a container, but warned them not to touch the object. Unfortunately, the eye leapt at Trooper Mellon and later Volatzin, transforming them into monsters that had to be put down. Trooper Barlow kept denying Ross's request of retreat until Volatzin ended up killing him. With the threat over, Ross crushed the Orkovsk Eye, deciding that it was too dangerous to have. As he left, Moksha sect vampires snuck into the castle, grateful for the soldiers for destroying the artifact, allowing them access. Later back at the Pentagon, Ross accused Brigadier Nelson of planting Barlow on his team and testing out the artifact on his men. His superior accused him of treason, but the military police came to arrest Nelson, finding proof in Barlow's diary. Ross was commended and promoted to Nelson's rank. His superior officer told Thaddeus that they were going to stick with scientific weapons in the future, as they were easier to control. General Ross was once again sent to St. Kong. Thereafter, he assumed his position in armament research. In his final years at school, Bruce Banner met and fell in love with Angela Lipscomb, and the two began dating. They had a promising relationship with their educational backgrounds, and Angela helped Bruce come out of his shell. However, while Angela succeeded in getting scholarship grants, Bruce had great difficulty, and his anger and frustration over this began to boil to the surface. Having grown jealous of her success and attributing it to her being attractive, Bruce abruptly ended their relationship and cut off all contact with her. Banner wished to pursue philanthropic brands of science, but could not receive any financial funding for his projects. Shortly thereafter, Bruce was tapped to work for the United States Army by Thunderbolt Ross to develop his gamma bomb for military use. While Bruce intended to develop his bomb as a means of destroying enemy weapons and buildings but sparing human lives, Ross was only interested in making a destructive weapon that would make America's enemies fear them. On the day that Bruce took the job with the military, he was contacted by the mental hospital where his father had been kept for years. He went to see his father and was told that he was cured, and his father also appeared repentant of his past crimes and begged his son to allow him back in his life. Despite his initial misgivings and his inability to trust his father, Bruce agreed to take his father in. However, Bruce noticed that the longer his father stayed with him, the more mentally unstable he became, and Bruce became suspicious that his father might be trying to kill him. When Ross learned that Bruce's father had come to live with him, he warned Bruce that the fact that he was allowing a known murderer to live with him could be a security risk. But Bruce told Ross to mind his own business and then left the house, unaware that his father was following him. Bruce went to visit his mother's grave, as it was the anniversary of her murder. He was confronted by his father, who revealed that he was not as cured of his mental illness as he had led the psychiatric hospital to believe. Still holding on to the notion that his son might be a mutant, Brian attacked his son. Bruce fought off his father, but in the struggle, he forced his father back into his mother's tombstone. The force in which Brian's head connected with the tombstone was fatal, and he died instantly, something which might not have been an accident. Bruce fled the scene, and, thanks to the rainstorm, all evidence placing him at the scene was erased. Bruce reported his father missing, and when the police found his body, they wrote it off as a mugging gone horribly wrong. As a coping mechanism, Bruce submerged the memory of murdering his own father, instead remembering that his father left after being fought off. Banner began pitching his Gamma Bomb project to the United States government. This was a means to an end for Banner, as he hoped that the weaponizing of his gamma research could lead to it being used in other areas, such as medicine to cure disease. However, Banner intentionally made the bomb not nearly as powerful as it could have been, and his frequent tweaking of the bomb prompted military brass and government officials to become uneasy with the amount of taxpayer dollars that were being spent on the project. Banner's project would have been cancelled if it were not for a charismatic entrance and endorsement from Tony Stark, who stood by Banner's work. However, things became sour when Stark pointed out areas where the bomb could be improved. This led to an argument between Banner and Stark, which soured their relationship. Soon, Banner arrived at Los Diablos Missile Base, aka Desert Base, in New Mexico. Ross still had a critical opinion of Banner, calling him both a milksop and a weakling and constantly demanding results. Upon finding a childhood stuffed animal among Banner's belongings, Ross was even more disparaging, unintentionally ripping the arm off of the stuffed animal. Despite this rough start, Banner began to continue his work on the Gamma Bomb project. It was during his research in developing the Gamma Bomb that Bruce began working with a technician and became very close to him and his wife. When the technician and his wife gave birth to a young girl named Poe, they made Banner the godfather of the child. Uninterested in the child at first, Banner soon came to think highly over her and enjoyed answering her questions about the nature of the world that she lived in. However, he was slightly troubled by her infatuation with death. Tragedy struck when the technician and Poe died in a plane crash, their deaths deeply upsetting Banner, who attended their funeral before continuing his work on the Gamma Bomb. During a leave in Frank Castle's third tour of duty, he and Maria conceived their second child, Frank Jr. Ben Grimm, now a test pilot, flew Wolverine to meet adamantium expert Myron McClane. McClane was targeted by Sabretooth and Hydra under Silver Fox's leadership. Wolverine was aided by Nick Fury, Carol Danvers, and Natasha Romanoff, now the Russian super spy Black Widow. Even though Wolverine and his allies triumphed, his full memories remained not restored, and he didn't recognize any of his former friends or enemies. Gamora, the most dangerous woman in the galaxy, was first spotted on Earth 616 at this time, aged 24. After meeting Rocket Raccoon, the two were captured by Baroons. They were rescued by Jesse Alexander and his supernovas, and Rocket and Gamora formed a friendship with Jesse. At the age of 12, Peter had befriended a boy named Tommy Monks. Already afraid of heights, Peter was convinced to climb up a tree and fell from it, breaking his arm. The injury caused May to become even more protective of Peter, despite Ben's attempts to get her to ease up on the boy. Peter developed a love for comic books, particularly ones about monsters and science fiction. However, when Peter was plagued with nightmares about the various creatures in the comic books he read, his Aunt May had them taken away. Unaware by all at the time, Peter was being tormented by the dream demon known as Nightmare. May was less strict about comic books when Peter came across his Uncle Ben's old collection of comic books from the 1940s. Peter quickly fell in love with the stories about superheroes like Captain America, the android Human Torch, Namor the Submariner, and others. He romanticized becoming a superhero himself, and wished that someday he could be one. This fantasy started gaining traction when his Aunt May was knocked over by a boy on a skateboard and twisted her ankle. Wishing he had some way to stop the boy, Peter went home and sketched a design for what would eventually become the web shooters that he would use in later years. When Alex Summers was 13, the killer of his foster family's first son, Vincent, kidnapped Alex and his foster sister, Haley Blanding. Alex manifested his mutant powers for the first time, incinerating Vincent. Mr. Sinister appeared, quite surprised to find that Alex's potential possibly exceeded Scott's. Unfortunately, Alex lacked any control over his powers. Sinister placed psyblocks on both Alex and Haley, causing them to forget everything that happened that night. Magnus used his powers to help track Nazi war criminals on behalf of the CIA. He was also working for the Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, and instead of turning the Nazis over to the CIA, he was giving them over to Israel for trial. The CIA were well aware of this and let him give the Nazi war criminals to Israel, as long as they were Nazis that Russia had optioned. When Magnus captured and attempted to give Nazi Hans Richter to Israel, his CIA controller decided to put an end to his activities. They murdered Magnus' girlfriend at the time, Isabel, right in front of his eyes. In a rage, Magnus killed his controller and the other agents. What little trust Magnus still had in humanity died that day, and he realized that the only answer was for Homo Superior to conquer mankind once and for all. Taking the name Magneto, he swore that he would lead his people to the destruction of mankind. Magnus later found himself in Brooklyn, New York, under the guise Michael Xavier, where he had learned that mutants were gathering and hiding from humans in plain sight. Magnus asked the mutant Cassandra Michaels to create his first uniform, believing that with all of the colorfully costumed heroes and villains walking the earth, it was imperative that he do the same to make a statement. After accompanying Cassandra on a date, they were attacked by an underground Morlock who dwelled in the sewers. Magnus entertained the idea of becoming a hero, but after feeling Cassandra was ungrateful, realized that his heart lay elsewhere. Magneto designed his helmet to shield him from telepathy. He was determined to conquer the human race and to prevent the oppression of mutants as the self-proclaimed savior of mutant kind. He created an orbital space station, Asteroid M, to use as a base and began to assemble a team he called the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Magneto was unaware of the negative effect his powers had on his mental stability, with more frequent use making his behavior increasingly unstable. The more Magneto abused his powers, the more unhinged he would become. Magnus had an affair with a married woman by the name of Susanna Dane. Susanna bore Magneto a child named Lorna, but hid the true parentage of the child from her husband, Arnold. The man eventually learned of his wife's infidelity and confronted her while flying her and Lorna on a plane. Lorna had inherited her father's powers over magnetism, and her parents' fighting caused her powers to manifest, destroying the plane and inadvertently killing her parents. Magneto was drawn to the crash site by the magnetic pulse unleashed by his young daughter. Believing she was not ready for the life he had to offer, he had his associate mastermind use his powers of illusion to rewrite her memories, erasing the encounter and the crash from her memory. Professor Xavier formed an alliance with Fred Duncan, an FBI agent investigating the growing number of mutants. Xavier shared with Duncan his plan to locate young mutants and enroll them in his school for gifted youngsters to train them to use their powers, as well as provide them conventional educations for humanity's benefit. Meanwhile, Vought stayed with Professor Xavier, partially because she loved him, but also to convince him to give up what she felt were nonsensical ideas. Xavier became aware of two other mutants, Pietro and Wanda Maximoff, and offered to them the chance to return with him to America to hone their powers. Pietro refused on their behalf. Bearing little to no control over her unpredictable abilities, Wanda Maximoff accidentally set fire to a village they lived at the heart of Europe, in Transia. A mob formed to lynch her under the accusation of her being a witch. More specifically, one of them proclaimed her a Scarlet Witch. Her brother Pietro attempted to protect his sister in vain, but the assailants were ultimately scared off by the powerful mutant supremacist Magneto, who rescued the twins in return for their loyalty to his cause of mutant absolutism. As such, they were recruited into Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Indebted to Magneto, the twins were willing to serve him until their debt was repaid. As a mutant terrorist, Pietro adopted the name Quicksilver, retreating with his sister to a recluse lair in Asteroid M. Learning of Magneto's intentions, Xavier and Amelia traveled to the long-abandoned Auschwitz concentration camp to confront Magneto on the anniversary of his time there during World War II. There, Xavier attempted a final plea to Magneto to work with him to bring about peaceful coexistence between humans and mutants. However, Magneto had given in fully to his hatred of the human race and refused to listen. Upon leaving, Magneto warned Xavier that when they next met, it would be as enemies.